you sunbathers out there. Welcome to the Sunroom. My name is Nnayaha. I am your host for this episode of the Sunroom. And today with us, we have Mr. Frank Haberle, who is the author of the book Shufflers, which was released last year, September. Welcome to the show, Mr. Haberle.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so grateful.
Thank you for being here. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I'm really happy to. My name's Frank Haberle. I'm a longtime Brooklyn resident. I've lived in Brooklyn, New York for probably the last 35 years with a couple of interruptions. I live here. I work in the nonprofit sector. Currently, I work for the greatest place on the planet. I'm so excited to get to work for New Settlement up in the Bronx, which is a settlement house that provides after school and college access and workforce programs for young people and for families in the Bronx. And so I've been working in the nonprofit world for about 35, as long as I've been in New York, about 35 years. And then outside of that, I'm a very proud parent of three, not so much kids anymore. I have, we have three, two in college right now. We're going to pick one up this weekend after her first year and another one's graduating. And I, in my spare time, in my copious spare time, I am a creative writer. I write short stories, which I've been doing probably for the last 20 years, which led me to writing this book that just came out.
Beautiful, beautiful. So diving right into the book, what was your inspiration behind Shufflers? Tell us a little bit about the storyline, and if you could get into, without getting into too much detail and giving any spoilers away, what is the book about?
Sure, thank you. This is a good question because I still, I didn't really realize what it was about probably until I was done with it in a lot of ways, because I had been writing for a long time short stories about, and for some reason I really focused on, and I'm really creatively interested in the 1980s. When I was a young man between 20 and 31, I was kind of, I don't want to say I was like the cliche of the lost soul, but I was, I did a lot of bouncing around and low-level employment and traveling from place to place. I was in Colorado, I was in Alaska, I was in New England, I was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
And it was a long trip. I will say that it was, in part, I will say now, I reflect on that I had a, kind of a drinking problem that fueled it maybe in a lot of ways and just kept me from having a normal 20s experience, but it also opened up this other world, that I just ended up in. And I've always wanted to write stories about, the people I met along the way, the kind of funny scenarios that happen in the jobs that, I don't think a lot of people have experience being a ski lift operator. Many people have skied, but there's a whole different perspective when you're stuck in that little booth at the mid station and somebody goes by hanging by their coat. That, creates a world of short stories, in a lot of ways. I did a lot of that. I worked in factories. I worked some construction. I had some really interesting, a lot of dishwashing and carpet cleaning. I really enjoyed carpet cleaning, actually, of all the jobs I had back then. It's very rewarding. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to going into a restaurant and starting from the door and working your way to the back door. So, but I was always very interested. There were a lot of people that just kind of came into my life, and reflecting on it later. And I don't think I actually kind of grasped how important it was that I was so. Kind of guided in a lot of ways, very gently, just and moved by the stories of other people who were also working in this kind of like, maybe more stuck than I was in this kind of minimum wage struggle, which, we still hear about today when we when people talk about like Amazon workers and there's so many people who are kind of stuck in this kind of minimum wage drift. And but there were just so many people who were just so inspiring and kind and complicated. I just met so many fascinating characters. So I ended up writing short stories. I was a short story writer for a long time. And then just to be quick about it. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I'd been somewhat successful getting short stories published, but they're all kind of different in different voices. At the beginning of the pandemic, though, when I was kind of locked in, we were all locked in this apartment, the five of us, my wife and our three kids and I, we were all kind of stationed in different places. In a Brooklyn neighborhood, we had a lot of kind of goings on in the building all night long. We were, and there were a lot of things that just kind of kept me up at night. And I found it was very calming to kind of go back and try to really work on these stories, to work on new, littler, shorter clips of some of these stories, and kind of to see this, not only this book, but this journey that I was on is kind of something that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know, something that, and once I removed myself from it creatively, like I created a character who's really not me. He's a little bit cooler than I was, I think, and probably more, maybe more detached, more fine with being detached. And so the character Danny, who recurs through the story, is kind of like hard to connect with. He kind of sabotages himself a lot. People kind of try to help him, and you know, I think when I stepped out of the story, I'm like, well, why didn't you didn't have to, you know, move in with the people, you just had to kind of accept their help. But you know, so it's kind of a reflection on kind of like that aimlessness of youth, that many of us, you know, kind of end up on a search. You know, I think when I was young, I knew a lot of people who ended up, you know, going straight into business or sales jobs, and you know, so I'm pretty happy that I ended up kind of end the journey I had to end up on.
Well, honestly, it seems like your timing is impeccable. With the release of the story and how everything is kind of culminates, because it's relevant. It's quite relevant. And the story is written about transients during the Reagan era. And I think it's fascinating how those same experiences are relevant today, with the state of affairs that we found ourselves in, the smack dab in the crosshairs of, how you're able to, you know, pull together this beautiful expression, this creative expression, this tapestry of your experiences, past and, you know, clear up to present, and be able to present it in such a creative way, I think is quite masterful. And I think it's also very considerate. It's very considerate because so many of us find ourselves in the position of being in a transition from either one place to another, one point in our life to another, one perspective to another. We're constantly growing and changing, and things around us often have an effect on us that we may not realize at the moment has us in transition. So I really think that this is a beautiful expression, and it's relevant to each and every one of us. And like I said, the timing is impeccable. It really
Thank
is.
you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I'm so grateful for that perspective on it, because I think we see, without getting into the politics of today's landscape, I think we're seeing a lot of things that are kind of tearing us apart and preventing us from just making eye contact. I mean, the phones are a great example of this. And, you know, I have one like everybody else does now, but I mean, how many times in New York City does somebody just kind of walk right through me on the sidewalk because they're so busy with their phones, or I'm listening to, you know, children call out, "Mommy, look," and mommy's looking at the phone. You know, I mean, it's really like, and not just the moms, the dads, everybody. And I think that they've done a lot to, I really feel there's a conscious effort to kind of disconnect us, and for us not to be open to, you know, understanding and building exchange between each other and just being together. And I don't know, there's so much magic in the world when you kind of open yourself up to, you know, kind of being free to connect with other people, and just not be so wrapped up in our own little thoughts and worlds and technology. So I really appreciate that perspective. I think a lot of this is going on that we saw in the 80s is really going on today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, that's a great point. That's an awesome point, because in this microwave society that we live in, we miss so much. We let so many things, the just the details slip by us. And it's those intricate little details that build the bigger picture. And there's no way to really be fulfilled in this life without all the intricate details. And
Oh,
what's your perspective on creative liberty in a society where we're so pressured to fit into this sort of box
mhm.
that was created? We're given it's like a multiple choice test, right?
Yeah,
It's like
A,
you
B, C, D.
exactly. What's your
Yeah,
perspective? What's been your experience and your creative freedom and how it's been,
yeah.
received?
It's D, all of the above. Because it's
Mm,
no, it's really I think that's a really interesting, I think that's such an interesting point, because I think that we've been really in all the creative fields, really. I mean, we can go from, my friends I knew who were painters to poets to writers.
mhm.
There's really this commercial market driven mindset about
Right,
what success is, and what
right.
kind of building an audience is. And I think that the thing about writing is, I would be fine if I had never gotten anything published, but if I was fine, I find, and I know a lot of people do, just find joy in unraveling, whatever's kind of going on in our heads, and maybe writing's kind of an easy example of that.
Hmm.
um but I think also, in the same way that we open up and we like put ourselves out, into this kind of marketing mindset, we also really open ourselves up to a scarier level of kind of criticism. And
Hmm.
we see it with our I see it with my young people, and with young people, other parents I know whose children are wrapped up in this kind of comparative analysis that goes on with how many hits did I have on Facebook, or how many likes, or I don't even know the technology. I'm too old. But and that's actually a barrier. It's not freeing, and it's not opening. It's I think it's narrowing in a lot of ways, and we see it in music a lot. I think there's kind
Absolutely.
of like a hot vein, and then people kind of fall into that vein, and
That's right.
yeah. But it's just, I think people should just be free. It's hard to find avenues to kind of just tell the story that you want to tell, and not worry about. And one other point I have on this is, like, I think, like, with the writing world, I think there's been a real professionalization of creative writing. I think, there's these master's programs in these colleges that are all about creative writing, which is great in a
Mm,
lot of ways. But I think, in a lot of ways, that's kind of the technical craft of writing. And in a lot of ways, it might encourage you to write like somebody else, to write
mm,
like what's popular, rather than go out and shuck clams for 4 years and kind of write about that and what you learned from that. And then get the
right.
writing part and the storytelling part down later is just a different approach.
Do you think we live in an environment where people really, really understand what writing and what expression, creative expression actually is? Because everything is so digital.
Oh, it is digital. Yeah, yeah. So I think the physical aspect of actually writing, I still, my first drafts are still in notebooks. And I'll tell you a bit about my great experience with a writing group I'm a member of. And I apologize for the trucks outside.
No
But
problem.
I think the practice of physically writing it's in itself a discipline. I've always
That's right.
referred to, because I ride the subway to and from the Bronx to go to work, for
Mm,
example, and I'll be sitting on the subway car for a long time. I usually read on the subway too. I don't really write on the subway, but I'll be sitting there. There'll be 20 people on the subway. 10 of them are staring at their phones. 8 of them are men who are pretending they're asleep because they don't want to give up their seat to the other people. One person is doing something kind of crazy, but then there's one person, there's a kid, usually young person, sitting in a corner scribbling in a notebook, or drawing pictures. I remember this older woman who I saw so many times, and she sat there and she was drawing in a notebook. And I remember one time watching her staring at an old gentleman who was kind of sleeping across from her, and he was staring at him and writing something in her notebook. I thought, oh,
mm.
she's doing something angry. It's like something like she's writing about how horrible these people are. And then she got up, and I remember watching her get up at 34th Street and rip out this piece of paper and put it on the man's knee while the man was sleeping. And it was this drawing of the man, which was the most, I've got to tell
Oh,
you, she was amazing. I saw it just briefly, like glimpsed at it from the other side, and the man took it, and he was kind of waking up. 34th Street, subway doors closing. The woman took just disappeared, and he was like, he held it up, and as the train was pulling out and she was long gone, he just started saying, "Thank you, thank you." I
that's
mean, it was like
beautiful.
so moving, but it was just
Beautiful.
that the act and the practice of actually physically not taking a picture with your phone, not,
Right.
you know, whatever else you could do with this, but she was real old school. And I always
Mm.
remember that moment.
How much of yourself goes into how much of your person and your energy and kind of like that inner sanctum is engaged when you pick up a pencil or a pen and you start to form these thoughts on paper and they come alive.
Yeah. So I'll tell you that I really appreciate that perspective. I'm very blessed because I have this writing program that I'm a facilitator for. It's a group called the New York Writers Coalition that my friend started. This is actually the 20-year anniversary.
Okay.
And it's a nonprofit group that started these writing workshops around the city. Totally focused on developing writing workshops for people who would never have an opportunity to like kind of
Mm.
sit in a real like group writing workshop. Like, they had programs on Rikers Island for a long time. They have programs in kind of youth centers, shelters, um, medical facilities around the city.
Oh, wow.
And I've
Wow.
been, yeah, and I helped him at the beginning because I have this nonprofit experience. I kind of start the organization, but then as we went on, I joined a workshop that my friend, this is Aaron Zimmerman, who's just the most wonderful guy in the world, and inspired. And in addition to running this incredible organization, I joined his workshop, and that really helped me because the workshops themselves use a method called the Amherst method,
Hmm.
which is this very calming setting, which isn't about the writing, but it's about putting your thoughts on paper and then expressing them. So we have workshop. And so I've been running a workshop for them for 15 years. I ended up just kind of becoming a workshop facilitator
Mm.
in the city. But what we do is we come together, and when I'm running the workshop, I bring a prompt, and then we all write kind of quietly together for 20 minutes or 15 minutes. And it's not, people don't have to respond to the prompt. They can be doing a shopping list. They can be
Mm.
doing, something they're working on. They could just be saying what happened to them on the way over that day. And then we very kind of quietly come together, and people are welcome to read what they wrote. Nobody has to read what they wrote. And then we have a very kind of strict structure about how we give feedback so that it's only positive feedback. It's all, this is what I liked about your piece. And it's all kind of treated anonymously because you have to respect that somebody just spilled something out responding. The other night, Monday night, I gave them something, we did something about a phone booth. I had a picture of a phone booth. I said, let's
Hmm.
start a story in a phone booth. And 8 people have a funny story about a phone booth, but somebody has a story about, the last time they talked to their, I don't know, father. And you treat it like fiction, and everything is treated like fiction because that gives people the space to feel that they can tell their story and not be kind of judged for how I dealt with that last conversation with and I'm making up this example of that, but it's like how I dealt with that last conversation. That's not what you want to hear at the end of that. You want to hear, I like the way that you kept focusing on the lights
Mm.
at the local lights turning red and green, and or something, and we find things that we like in the story. It's really an amazing journey. The group I work with, actually, everybody has it's with a great group called the Creative Center at University Settlement on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which is that great old neighborhood. Are you from New York?
I'm not.
Oh,
No.
okay. But I don't know if you've been here, but there's this neighborhood that really looks like it's out of, the 1900s. I mean, it really does. It's just incredible. The
Mm,
buildings are all kind of,
fascinating.
oh, it's really like this cool old part of the world. And so there's a settlement house in the middle called University Settlement.
Hmm.
And I've been teaching the class in the library up until COVID, and now we do it by Zoom. But I will say, like, the amount of inspiration I get from this, and I've really trained myself because I've been doing it long enough so that when I come in, I think of the prompts and I think of things that might create a thoughtful response. And but I don't know how to say this, but I kind of keep my brain clear until I give the prompt and we all sit, and then I'll start writing in response to the prompt the same way everybody else is. And I get to read during the class, which is really helpful for me because I'm not a great speaker. But it's very powerful. And in that, like, I've been able to kind of create a lot of stories. A lot of shufflers came out of this, the piles of notebooks I have sitting around from this class. And part of that was also because there were people responded very positively to these kind of funny stories about being a hapless hitchhiker, or something about working in a clam shack in Maine, or there was always something that kind of pulled it, and I could tell by that, like, what was kind of what I wanted to kind of work on more. And so when I started at the beginning of COVID, like I said, I had 100 notebooks piled up, and it was really easy for me to just kind of go, oh, where was that story I wrote about when I was stuck in Kansas City in that bus station, or something like that. And I could find them pretty quickly, and it all just kind of like clicked into place.
That's amazing. It's like you live in this perpetual place of creativity. You have so many different things to draw from, and you know how to draw from them.
Yeah.
And so, right, your writing class and everything that you offer, it sounds like it's an environment where you can be engaged on a cognitive level, but also on a creative level. And everything is working in tandem. Nothing is fighting or jarring against the other. You provide this environment where all of these things come together and work together so that people can understand first of all, that it's okay to express yourself creatively, and then how to express yourself creatively. So that's amazing.
Yeah, thanks. I think, like, one other thing I'd say about that too, and I'm sure in your creative life this is the same as well. I think that the time we spend walking around thinking about a story we want to write is actually writing. And I feel like I write stories when I'm on the subway in my head. I think I edit them in my head. And I think what happens when I'm home is really typing. You know what I mean? Like, at some point I type them up and I send them off somewhere, and then if they get published, they're done. And somehow I strung some together, and I found a guy. I sent it off cold to a guy who has this really cool publishing house in Minnesota, Bill Burleson at Flexible Press. And he called me 3 months later and said, I really want to talk to you about your book. And I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. There it was, so.
Well, let me ask you this. What, if you could think of the one thing that was pivotal for you when it comes to you wanting to be a writer, what truly inspired you? When did you know, without a doubt, that this is why you were created? This is what you were born to do?
Oh, that's so nice. That's a great question. I think I'll say, like, a bunch of things kind of converged around. I want to say it, I would love to be able to say it's the moment I kind of realized I have to stop drinking, which I did very suddenly and by myself. And I was in Alaska, and I was going through all these things, and I just woke up one morning and I said, I got to stop drinking. And I did, and that was great. And I'd like to say that was it. And then ended up somewhere in Oregon working construction, and I got a little computer and I typed 150 pages of my brilliant story. It was dreadful. And it sat there for 8 years, and then, but I think, there were a couple of factors. I want to say around 40, and I think a lot of people want to say they started young, and I'm just kind of so grateful kind of for the second half of my life that when I was 40, we had my wife had a brother who passed away very suddenly, and he was young, and he was a prolific playwright. He was an amazing, maybe one of the coolest people, honestly. I mean, in the short time that I knew him, because when we got together, before we were married, he got sick. He had brain cancer, and he passed away after about a year. But he was an amazing playwright. His name's Alan Maneri. And in a lot of ways, my wife's brother really inspired me to just, first of all, to think like outside of the box and don't worry about what people are really kind of concerned about, because his plays were really very cool and way out there. And but he had this great community of people, and he was really focused on the writing, the actual writing of it. he was a real inspiration to me about kind of like just saying, you know what, it's time to just start trying to maybe get things on paper and just, you know, I want to be a storyteller more than I want to be a technical writer. And so that's when I kind of like started trying to write short stories. I will also say that 9/11, I don't know what it was, but I think the people, I ended up being one of those people who was in an office building about 2 blocks south of the South
Oh,
Tower,
wow.
and spent
Wow.
some time there. Yeah, it was really, yeah, we'd have to have 3 more hours to tell you that story.
That's right.
But coming out of that moment, and there was this kind of like, some people reacted that in different ways. And to me, there was kind of a, I don't know, just this kind of, I'm not going to say, wow, I woke up, you know, the next morning on September 12th and said, I am now going to be a writer. But
Mm,
I will say that these things, the immediacy of these kind of moments, and also for some reason, I think a lot of people tell you that the opposite would happen, but I think having children really, because that's about the time that I had my first daughter. You know, we had our first daughter, and I just, I don't know what it was. You know, I think part of that also was like, as soon as she was old enough to listen, and probably well before I started telling her stories, you know, and I started getting into this
mm.
this exercise of telling stories. And I will tell you that every drive we did up to Vermont or something like that, I had to tell my kids the story of Hungry Johnny and the 100 Mile Hike, which is about when a friend of mine and I went off when I was 19 and decided we were going to hike the Appalachian Trail. And, you know, because we were not the smartest people in the world at the time, we kind of decided we could just do it without food, or we'd find food on the way, you know, so we just didn't know what we were doing. So anyhow, it became a very funny
That's
kind of
quite
children's story.
advantageous.
Yeah, yeah. And then it just built up into something, and before you know it, you know, so I think that maybe helped with kind of the storytelling and finding my voice too. And then that fourth thing is that writing group that I told you about earlier, just getting involved in this program. And you know, the motto of that organization is everybody has a voice and everybody has a
Mm.
story, you know, and it's really so true. Um, so I think that, you know, like a lot of things kind of converged around 40, you know, so that's it, you know. And I still work as a grant writer. I love work. That's kind of my work, is I work writing grant proposals, and that helps in a lot of ways, but it also is it kind of drains the fuel tank in a lot of ways too, you know, when you're trying to grind out a very tiresome proposal about, you know, some kind of and kind of following kind of the social service grant language mechanisms.
Mhm.
You learn a lot about what to not write and how to not write. So it's really kind of fun to have this other side.
That's amazing. Your writing career is like fine wine. It's had time to, you know, yeah, culminate and age and cure and do all of those things. And then when it was ready to be presented, you know, all the right things were in place. So that's a beautiful story. What advice would you give any up and coming writers who may not be as technically sound as some more experienced writers, but they have the raw talent, the drive, the
Mhm.
passion, and the creativity? What advice would you give them in this sort of environment? How should they start?
Well, I think the story is everything, you know, and it's the storytelling is so much more important than the style in which it's told. I think I really strongly believe that that reading, you know, I read a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of history. I just read, this is going to sound silly. I just read Xenophon's Anabasis, which is about the March of the 10,000 in ancient Greece, written by
Ah,
the guy who was there. It's a really cool story, and it's an
yeah.
adventure story in a lot of ways. But the problem with reading literary magazines all the time, and also reading kind of what's coming up in the New York Times bestseller list, not that that's not great, but you can't not compare yourself to that work, and then you
Mm,
get very discouraged very quickly. And the other thing that happens is um, you keep seeing things that you feel like, oh, I was going to write a story about the orphan train, because I used to work with a group that used to work on the orphan train. And then somebody wrote the book, The Orphan Train. And I was like, oh, I wanted to write that book. But you can very quickly hear all the knots. Don't write, don't write,
uh,
don't tell the story. Your story's already been told. Um, I think the other thing to not listen to that's really important for me is when I had people telling me, your stuff sounds a lot like, oh, so you're trying to do a Dennis Johnson thing,
Mm,
or oh, you're trying to do a Kerouac thing. That's the worst because, like, honestly, I'm not
that's
trying to
right.
do and it's not, it's well intended, or even, when people tell you your work reminds me of somebody, that can be kind of a deal. So not to listen to that, I think would be really good advice, and just to worry first about the story, secondly about the writing, and the last thing I think is always I always heard a lot of, especially in the early going, was like, there's not a lot of arc to your story, or there's not a
Mm,
lot of arc. Doesn't, it can come in any shape. There seems to be a formula, and I think this is part of that MFA kind of language again, where they feel like there's a formula to a story, like how it builds up.
right.
And I think the opposite is true. I just love reading things that are just kind of broken up and throw something into the middle of the story. And I love kind of the free, you've got a giant prairie in front of you, so
Yes,
why build the same house that everybody else built right in the front of the prairie? It's just, let the story go, and let the story tell itself, and let those characters tell their story.
exactly. Have
Mm.
you considered turning any of your stories into a play?
Oh, that's really great. Thank you for asking that. I had one of the fun things about the COVID situation was, in the early going, when my book came out, I have a friend who's a playwright who actually put on a staged Zoom production of
Oh,
a sequence from Shufflers, which was so
that is
fun to
cool.
work on. It was really cool. I will send you a copy because it's really fun. It was four
Oh,
people from this group I told you about, the Creative Center in Lower Manhattan. So these are non-traditional actors, but they were amazing. I mean, and they took on these personalities of all these characters. I took what I think is the funniest part of the story, which has to do with these low-level drug dealers trying to pull a big deal in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and somebody, before you know it, they're
trouble.
floating. Yeah, it's really just hijinks ensues. But it was really fun
Oh
to have
yeah.
a play about it, and I have thought about that. And then there's like other stories where I just remember like sitting in a car, like in a hitchhiking sequence, and things being said that were so profound, and you don't even think about it until afterwards, but you still see them. You see the back of their heads, as they're kind of like spilling
Uh-huh.
their life story, and just comes out as the world is driving by. So I could really see them theatrically. It's really fun to kind of picture. But I'd love to try to write a play, because I think it's a totally different side of the brain.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. If that's the case, I'm certainly looking forward to it. Can't wait.
Oh, good. Front row
Cannot.
seat. You've got it. Thank you.
Sounds good. I'm going to hold you to
Okay.
that. Well, with that being said, I've just got one more question for
Mhm.
you. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but this is good stuff.
Oh, this is great.
This
Yeah,
is
no.
good stuff. I really appreciate your time. I've just got one more question for you, and that is, what's in the future? Anything up and coming?
Well, I'm really excited. I'm gonna pull it up here because I just had a
Oh,
little book come out that
great.
I'm kind of excited. It's like a little, only to show you how small it is, but I just had a second little book come out with a
Okay.
great little, and the font is so small that it's kind of like the back of an insurance contract or something. But it's called The Biggest Slide in the World, and it's a book about two little boys who are orphaned and get sent off to a boarding school up in New England in the 70s. So
Mm,
it's very different from Shufflers. And I'm working on a next book, and I've started talking. I'm not saying that I have it yet, but if I do, I'm really excited to have it. I don't know when I'm going to have time to work on it. I've kind of drafted it, and it's actually the book I started. I told you when had just quit drinking way back in Bend, Oregon, and if you keep working on something long enough, 30 years, you finally
no.
get somewhere. But I'm really excited about that story, so I'm really hopeful that that will come out.
Well, awesome. Awesome. How can your viewers and fans and all of us here today present and listening to this and enjoying all of this, how can we reach you?
Well, I have a website. and it's www.frankhaberle.com, the same way that my name's spelled. And my website engineer is my 21-year-old daughter. So it's a work in progress. We're working on it, but it's really, it's been a lot of fun to work on that. That's probably the best way, because I'm trying to kind of keep that up to date and keep stories on it. I'm going to have a bootleg of a novella up there, and connections to all my short stories, and yeah, that's probably the closest thing I have to a media presence right now.
Okay, and your website, is that where we can all get a copy of both of your books?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there should be a link right there up front.
Awesome.
I have to say thank you so much. I mean, these questions are really, they're so thought-provoking and thoughtful, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. And I really have to give a giant hello to Wahanama Robinson, who is the publisher of Blood Bought Books and is an amazing poet. I found great comfort in her poetry while riding the subway at 12 o'clock at night. And but also this whole thing that you guys are doing, I'm so impressed the more I learn about this kind of publishing entity, but also your work, like helping young people in Uganda, and that work is just remains so important. So I'm really grateful for you and for the work you do and for this great opportunity. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. That certainly means a lot. It really does. It makes all the difference in the world to know that there's someone else out there whose heart, we make that connection and understand that it's not just about us as individuals.
Yeah.
It really isn't. It takes all of us to make the world go around. Absolutely. And so I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your beautiful creativity and all of your experiences that you've been willing to share in the form of creativity, and everything that you're doing with the New York Writers Coalition, and really giving a platform and an environment for young people who have that same passion, who are going through all types of different things, to be able to have a place where they can learn to express themselves, where they can be appreciated, where they can grow and expand and really rise above whatever circumstances seem to be way out of the realm of them being able to overcome those circumstances. So really, I want to thank you so much for your time. I want to thank you so much for your beautiful gift. And, keep at it. I can't wait to see those plays coming out.
Now you got me going on the plays. I'm really ready to go. So Broadway.
Absolutely.
That'll be great.
Just not a matter of if, but when.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I'm going to start on that right now. So thanks.
Well, Mr. Haberle, again, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. It has been wonderful. I learned a lot, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I learned a lot too. Thank you so much.
You take care, be safe. I hope that we can do this again very, very soon.
Hopefully. Yeah, I hope so. Maybe in person someday too. This is really good for me. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to all of our viewers, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Sunroom. Take care, God bless, and we'll see you next time.